My son-in-law stood in my kitchen and told me his parents were flying in for Thanksgiving, all 22 of them, and that I'd be footing the bill and sleeping in my own tool shed so his mother could have my bedroom. I set down my coffee, looked him dead in the eye, and told him that sounded absolutely perfect. I mentioned I'd been meaning to take a little trip to Charleston anyway. He could figure out the turkey himself because I am nobody's cook and nobody's bank. His face went white as printer paper. But the thing that would leave him and my daughter penniless and living out of a Motel 6 by New Year's, that part hadn't even started yet. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever had family treat your generosity like it was owed to them, hit that like button because you already know exactly how this story ends. My name is Walter. I'm 58 years old, and for 32 years I ran heating and cooling systems for commercial buildings, hospitals, office towers, a couple of airport terminals. I know how a building breathes. I know what happens when you starve a system of what keeps it alive. And I know precisely how long it takes before nobody inside even notices the air's gone stale, because by then they're too busy dying slow to complain loud. My wife Carol and I bought a rambling 5-bedroom farmhouse outside Lexington, Kentucky, 26 years ago. Wraparound porch, 4 acres, an old red barn Carol turned into a painting studio. It was going to be the house our grandkids grew up running around in. Carol passed away 4 years ago this past spring. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the funeral. I buried the only woman I ever loved and kept living in the house we built, because leaving it felt like leaving her twice. I kept that place immaculate. Every fence post painted, every gutter cleared, Carol's studio dusted and untouched, her brushes still standing in a coffee can by the window exactly where she left them. It was quiet. It was mine. That lasted until 2 years ago, when my daughter Megan and her husband Trevor showed up on a Sunday afternoon with 3 suitcases and a story about their landlord selling the building out from under them. Megan is 31. She's my only child, and I loved her too much and disciplined her too little, which I understand now is its own kind of failure. She married Trevor 4 years ago. Trevor is 33, works in business development for some software company I still don't fully understand, and spends more time on his phone posting pictures of his life than actually living one. They asked if they could stay with me for a few months while they got back on their feet. Just through the winter, they said. Long enough to save a real down payment. I said yes, because that's what fathers do. I cleared out 2 guest rooms. They never left. The differences showed up fast. I'm up at 5:30 every morning, same as I was for 32 years running a boiler room. I make my coffee, I read the paper on the porch if the weather allows, and I keep my house the way Carol kept it organized, cared for, respected. Trevor doesn't stir before 11. Megan follows not long after, and the 2 of them treat my kitchen like a hotel buffet that restocks itself. Trevor leaves his energy drink cans, sweating rings into Carol's oak dining table. No coaster, no thought given to it at all. Day after day, I wipe those rings away in silence, feeling something in my chest calcify a little more each time. The real rot set in the day Trevor pulled into the driveway in a brand new truck. Jet black, fully loaded, the kind of thing that costs more than I made my first 5 years on the job. He hopped out grinning like he'd won the lottery, and Megan came running off the porch clapping her hands. I walked out wiping motor oil off my fingers and asked him plainly how a man who was supposedly saving every dollar for a house down payment had just financed a $60,000 truck. He wouldn't look at me. Said it was a signing bonus from a new contract at work, waved it off like it was nothing. I wanted to believe him. A father always wants to believe his kid is doing fine. But I spent 3 decades reading gauges and pressure valves, and I know when something doesn't add up. 2 days later, the truth showed up in an envelope. I was sorting mail at the kitchen counter and found a statement for the account I'd opened for Megan back when she turned 18. An emergency fund, $22,000, meant for exactly what it says on the label. Emergencies. A medical crisis. Losing a job. I opened the envelope and stared at a balance of $411. He drained it, used my daughter's safety net as a down payment on a truck to impress his coworkers. I didn't yell. I didn't storm up the stairs. I folded that statement along its creases, walked it into my study, and locked it in the same fireproof box where I keep Carol's will. I watched through the window as Trevor buffed the hood of that stolen truck in my driveway, whistling to himself, and something in me shifted permanently. He stopped being a son-in-law who needed patience. He became a liability I was quietly assessing, the way you'd assess a support beam that's already cracked but hasn't fallen yet. Things kept sliding. One night I was in my study reading when the front door banged open and half a dozen of Trevor's coworkers piled in for an impromptu get-together nobody asked me about. Music thumping through the walls. Laughter I didn't recognize echoing down my own hallway. An hour in, my study door opened without a knock. Megan stood there, holding an empty glass. Told me not asked. Told me to go down to the cellar and bring up 3 bottles of the good bourbon I keep for special occasions, because her guests were asking for something better than beer. She said it loud enough that her friends in the hall could hear her giving orders to her own father. I closed my book, walked to the cellar, brought up the bourbon, handed it over without a word, and went back to my study. I let her have that little moment. I was already somewhere else in my head. The next morning, and right in the center of the rug Carol had picked out on our honeymoon in Savannah, a dark, spreading stain of spilled bourbon soaked deep into the fibers overnight. I didn't wake anybody up. I got the carpet cleaner from the closet, got down on my knees at 6 in the morning, and scrubbed. Anybody watching would have thought I was a broken old man reduced to cleaning up after his own children in his own house. They'd have been wrong. Every stroke of that brush was clarifying something in me. This wasn't submission. This was patience with a purpose. I already knew, somewhere underneath the calm, that I was going to take my life back, and they were not going to see it coming until the floor gave out from under them. November came in cold and gray over the bluegrass. The trees had gone bare, and I kept the thermostat comfortable, same as always, trying to hold on to some version of peace in my own home. I'd spent the afternoon smoking a brisket, a recipe Carol and I used to make together every fall. Trevor and Megan came down just as I was pulling it off the smoker. Hadn't lifted a finger to help, hadn't offered a dime toward groceries in going on 2 years. We sat down to eat, and about halfway through the meal, Megan set her phone face down on the table, cleared her throat, and told me she needed to give me a heads up about Thanksgiving. A heads up, I repeated. Yes, she said, leaning back like she was discussing the weather. Trevor's whole family usually does Thanksgiving at a resort in Florida, but this year they wanted something more traditional, more homey, so she'd offered to host them here. I set my fork down. Hosted. In a house she doesn't own, doesn't maintain, and hasn't paid one utility bill toward in 2 years. I asked, keeping my voice level, exactly how many people we were talking about. She waved her hand like it was nothing. Just his parents, his 2 brothers and their wives, the kids, an aunt and uncle, some cousins, 22 people, give or take. Flying in on the Tuesday before, staying through the weekend after. 22 strangers trampling through the house Carol and I built with our own hands, tracking mud across her hardwood floors, treating my home like a free resort. Before I could even respond, Megan pulled a folded stack of papers from her cardigan pocket and slid it across the table to land beside my plate. Since she'd be too busy handling the decorations and the seating chart, she needed me to handle the grocery run. I picked it up. It wasn't a normal list. Page 1 demanded 2 whole free-range organic turkeys from a specialty butcher 40 minutes away. Page 2 was an entire manifesto of imported cheeses, aged prosciutto, artisanal crackers. The final page listed 6 cases of a specific champagne that retailed north of $90 a bottle, plus premium bourbon, craft beer, sparkling water flown in from Italy apparently. I did the math in my head. Close to $4,000, easy. I want you to buy all this, I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Obviously, she sighed, rolling her eyes like I was slow. I don't have time, Dad. I've got the photographer to coordinate, the centerpieces, the whole aesthetic. Trevor finally spoke up, soft and useless as ever. Come on, Walt, he mumbled, staring at his plate. It'd really help. You've got the truck bed for the groceries. You've got the time during the day. It's the holidays. We should all pitch in. Pitch in! That phrase sat like ash on my tongue. They weren't asking me to pitch in. They were ordering me to finance and staff a luxury banquet for people I'd met twice and couldn't stand. I could have thrown that list back across the table. I could have told them both to pack their bags that night, but an explosion just hands them ammunition to call you the unreasonable one. I've spent 32 years managing systems under pressure, and the biggest failures never come with a bang. They come quiet, one support quietly pulled at a time, until the whole structure just gives out on its own. I folded the list along its creases and slid it into my shirt pocket. I understand, I said, my voice smooth. You've got a lot on your plate with the decorating. I'll handle the shopping. Megan practically glowed with relief. Good, she said, picking her phone back up. Go early Tuesday. The good turkeys go fast. I thought that was the end of it. I carried my plate to the sink and started washing it. Then I heard her nails tapping the table again behind me. Oh, one more thing, she said, voice flat, no hesitation at all. About sleeping arrangements. I didn't turn around right away. I dried my hands slow, hung the towel over the oven handle, and finally faced her. She was already back on her phone, barely looking up. The kids would take the living room and sleeping bags. His brothers and their wives would take the 2 guest rooms. The cousins could do air mattresses in my study. But that left his parents. And frankly, Dad, the guest rooms just aren't going to cut it for them. His mother has a hip replacement. She can't be walking down a cold hallway at 2 in the morning to use a shared bathroom. They need the master suite. They need their own attached bath. The words hit the air and just hung there. The master suite, my bedroom. The room Carol and I shared for 22 years. It wasn't a place to sleep. It was a sanctuary. It was the room where we whispered about Megan's future when she was still small enough to sit on my lap. It was the room where I held Carol's hand at 3 in the morning, while the hospice nurse waited quietly in the hallway, the room where I heard her take her last breath. Her reading chair still sits by that window. Her jewelry box still sits on that dresser exactly where she left it. And Megan wanted me to pack it up so a woman I'd met at exactly 2 holiday dinners could have a jacuzzi tub she'd never once thanked me for. I see, I said, my voice gone quiet and dangerous. And where exactly would you like me to sleep for this week-long visit? Megan didn't even blink. She said I could just set up in the tool shed out back. It's heated well enough, she said, and I'm an early riser anyway, so I wouldn't be in anybody's way out there. It just made the most sense logistically. The tool shed, a 12 by 16 box where I kept the riding mower, paint cans, and a space heater that barely does the job on a mild October night, let alone a Kentucky Thanksgiving with frost on the ground. She wanted to exile me to a freezing metal shed so strangers could sleep in the bed where I held my dying wife's hand. Something cold and absolutely clear ignited in my chest. Not the hot rage of a younger man. The precise, clean clarity of somebody who's just watched a system finally fail past the point of repair. Before I answered her, I looked past Megan, straight at Trevor. He'd heard every word. He knew exactly what that room meant to me. I'd told him the story of Carol's last night in it, back when he was still trying to earn my trust. He knew the tool shed had no insulation worth mentioning. I stared at him, giving him one last chance to be a man, to look his wife in the eye and tell her this had gone too far. I needed him to say his father-in-law would not be treated like a stray dog in his own house. Trevor shifted in his seat, pushed a piece of brisket around his plate, wouldn't meet my eyes. Come on, Walt, he finally mumbled. It's just a week. Let them have the room. Make it easier on everybody. It's just a week. Those 4 words settled it. Whatever thread of patience I still had left toward that boy dissolved completely. I looked at the top of his bowed head and felt nothing. Not anger, just the cold, clean detachment you feel deciding to throw out a tool that's too far gone to fix. I looked back at Megan. She was glowing with quiet victory, certain she'd tested the last boundary and found none standing. I let out a slow breath, smoothed my shirt, and forced a warm, entirely fake smile onto my face. You make a fair point, I said, my voice smooth as glass. His parents shouldn't have to navigate a dark hallway at their age. The master suite's the logical choice. I'll clear my things out this weekend. The shed'll suit me just fine for a few nights. Megan clapped her hands together, a sharp little sound of triumph. Perfect, she said. I'll text his mom, tell her she's getting the big room. Trevor finally looked up and offered me a weak, grateful little smile. Thanks, Walt, he said. I didn't tell him he was welcome. I turned my back and walked out of that kitchen, down the hall, into my study, the one room in that house Megan had never once set foot in, because I kept it locked. I sat down at my desk, picked up my phone, and dialed a number I'd had memorized for 15 years. They thought they'd won. What they'd actually done was hand me the tools to take my whole life back, and they didn't even know it yet. The line picked up on the second ring. Deborah Hale speaking. A sharp voice cut through, brisk as ever. Deborah wasn't a warm family friend. She was my estate attorney, the most ruthless asset protection lawyer in central Kentucky, and she'd been telling me for 2 years to cut Trevor off financially before he bled me dry. I'd always told her he just needed more time to find his footing. Deborah, I said, it's Walter. You were right about him. Draft the paperwork. We're tearing the whole arrangement down. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet a long moment, no guilt anywhere in me. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank. For 2 years, I'd let a slow leak drain my accounts, a leak with a name, and that night I sealed it. I found the joint account I'd opened for Megan after college, meant to bridge her into adulthood, and instead turned into a permanent crutch. Steakhouse dinners, a luxury car detailing subscription, a $500 charge at a golf outfitter for Trevor's clubs. I clicked to remove him as an authorized user. The system asked if I was sure. I didn't hesitate. Done. I did the same to the backup savings account in the shared emergency fund. Just like that, the safety net that had caught Trevor every time he jumped without a parachute was gone. Next, I opened the supplementary credit card I'd given Megan for household groceries, back when I still believed that's what it would be used for. I scrolled the last 6 months and found a rolling record of manicures, a boutique gym membership, a weekend spa package for her and a friend, $400 at a shoe outlet just last week. I could have canceled it that instant, but an engineer doesn't drop a wrecking ball without mapping the whole trajectory first. If I killed the card tonight, she'd know by morning. Adjust. Find another angle. I wanted her to feel the full weight of it in public, exactly when she was leaning her entire trust on it. So I opened the advanced settings instead. I set a hard decline on any single transaction over $60, and I scheduled the card for full cancellation in exactly 72 hours, time to land right when she'd be standing at the specialty butcher with 2 turkeys and a cart full of imported cheese, expecting my plastic to absorb the whole bill. I leaned back in my chair. I just dismantled their entire financial ecosystem without raising my voice once. I closed the laptop. Tomorrow, I'd start packing. I gave myself 2.5 weeks. I started in the master bedroom, the sanctuary Megan had so casually demanded. Standing in that room, surrounded by 22 years of marriage, I didn't cry. I'd already cried everything I had 4 years ago, in a hospice room, holding Carol's hand as the machines went quiet. Her memory wasn't in the walls or the furniture. It lived in me. But these were still my things, and I wasn't leaving them for strangers to break. I got moving boxes from the barn and started with the valuables. Carol's grandmother's jewelry, her watercolors, the antique clock from her parents' estate. I emptied the fireproof box and my study deeds, Carol's death certificate, the will, bonds into a locked case. An operation like this needed total secrecy. If Megan walked in and saw bare walls, she'd throw a fit and try to claim what wasn't hers. So I did what any man who spent 3 decades reading blueprints would do. I drove to a discount store 2 towns over and bought cheap prints, mass-produced vases, a tin candle holder that looked like silver from 10 feet away, and I swapped everything out piece by piece. Where Carol's watercolor of the barn hung, I hung a forgettable print of a lighthouse nobody's ever heard of. Where her grandmother's silver tea set sat, I set out a dollar store knockoff polished to a shine. Megan never noticed a thing. She's the kind of person who looks at the surface of everything and never once at what's underneath. She walked past those fake paintings every single evening, scrolling her phone, complaining about her coworkers, completely unaware the real house was quietly being drained out from under her. Every afternoon, I loaded boxes into my truck and drove them to a climate-controlled storage unit across the county I'd rented, under a name that wasn't attached to anything Megan could find. By the second week, the house was a hollow shell dressed up to look full. One Tuesday, Trevor came home early from work and caught me taping up a box in the living room. I didn't flinch, didn't rush to hide anything. I told him I was just clearing out clutter so his parents would have room to breathe when they arrived. His face lit up like I'd handed him a gift. He told Megan that night I'd finally started pulling my weight, and Megan actually thanked me the next morning. Said the house had felt cluttered anyway and maybe I should box up some of the books in the hall too, since his mother didn't care for the smell of old paper. I nodded, said I'd take care of it. It took everything I had not to laugh out loud when she walked away. She just handed me an alibi on a silver platter. From that point on, I didn't have to hide a thing. I carried boxes out the front door in broad daylight, and she thanked me for it every time. By the final week, I'd cleared the good crystal, replaced it with mismatched dollar store plates, emptied the tool shop in the barn, down to a couple rusted screwdrivers. If 22 strangers were coming to eat off my table, they could eat off plates worth nothing. On my last trip to the storage unit, I stood looking at the neatly stacked columns of 26 years and pulled the metal door down, locking it tight. When I drove back to the house that evening, it looked exactly the same from the road. But walking through the front door, the air felt different. Hollow. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage set, waiting on its last act. I met Deborah at a quiet steakhouse downtown 2 nights later. She had a folder waiting on the table when I sat down, and she didn't smile. We'd moved past small talk years ago. I ordered water and a ribeye I needed my head clear. "You know, Walter," she said, tapping the folder, "I was starting to think you'd let that boy bleed you dry forever." "A system fails on its own timeline, Deborah," I told her. "You don't force the collapse. You wait until the load's perfectly balanced, then you pull the one pin that matters." She slid the folder across the table. For 3 years, a regional hospital network had been trying to buy my 4 acres to expand their parking structure and a new outpatient wing. They'd sent letters. I'd always thrown them in the fire, because that land was Carol's studio, Carol's garden, sacred ground. But sitting there that night, I understood something. The ground had already been desecrated by 2 people who never once said thank you. The garden was just dirt now. Carol wasn't in the soil. She was in me. I opened the folder. The offer was in cash, no contingencies, no inspection required because they intended to demolish the structure and build fresh. It was enough to buy a home on the water anywhere I wanted and still have plenty left to sit and earn interest for the rest of my life. But the money was just a pleasant side effect. I flipped to the transfer section. "I need the closing date set for the Monday after Thanksgiving," I told Deborah. "I remain the legal owner through the holiday weekend. But the second that clock strikes midnight Sunday into Monday, ownership transfers completely to the hospital network's holding company." Deborah's eyes narrowed, calculating. She knew exactly what I was building. "And the utilities," I continued. "I want my name completely off the water, gas, and electric accounts, transferred to the hospital's facilities division, effective the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, 2 days before his family lands." Deborah set her pen down. "Walter," she said carefully, "if we transfer utilities to a demolition-slated property, they do a hard shutoff. Corporate liability protocol. No heat, no water, in the middle of a Kentucky November. You'll be leaving whoever's inside that house to freeze." "I'm aware," I told her. "I'm not doing anything to anyone. I'm simply removing my support. If they want to host 22 people for a holiday, they can figure out how to keep them warm without me." Deborah let out a low whistle and started writing. It was, in her words, a masterwork of clean, legal disengagement. I signed every page without hesitating, without a single flicker of doubt. Every stroke of that pen cut another thread, tying me to 2 years of quiet disrespect. 22 people were arriving in 2 days, Megan's countdown clock in full swing, and I sat in my armchair by the fire, watching her spin around the house like a general preparing for battle, completely unaware the ground beneath her was already sold. She'd hired a cleaning service using the card that was about to die on the vine. She'd ordered fresh floral centerpieces for every surface in the house. She was building an illusion of a perfect life on a foundation that had already been quietly hollowed out. Just before noon, 2 days out, she marched over and shoved an updated grocery list into my hands. "Added a few things," she said. "His mother wants a specific smoked salmon. His uncle only drinks a particular gin. Don't wait till tomorrow. The shelves clear out." I took the list, didn't even open it, told her I'd handle it. She rolled her eyes and walked off barking something at Trevor about the outdoor lights. I folded that list into a small square, slipped it into my coat pocket, grabbed my keys, and walked out the front door. I wasn't headed to any butcher. I went to the bank for travel cash, then sat alone in a diner 2 towns over, savoring every single minute of it. I came home that evening, packed my last few things into the leather duffel Carol gave me for our anniversary trip to the coast years back, snapped it shut, put on my coat, and walked toward the stairs. Below me, Megan was in the foyer barking instructions at Trevor, who was halfway up a stepladder wrestling a string of lights. My footsteps on the stairs caught their attention. Trevor looked over his shoulder. Megan turned, and her eyes dropped straight to the duffel in my hand. "Where are you going?" she asked, sharp and irritated. "And where's the food? You were supposed to go to the butcher hours ago. Why do you have a bag?" I reached the bottom step and stood there, calm, straight-backed, and let the silence sit a moment before I let a real smile spread across my face. "Your whole family lands in 2 days," I said. 22 people. That's wonderful. Genuinely. It's perfect." Megan blinked. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice climbing. "Where's the food, Dad?" I tightened my grip on the duffel. "I'm headed to Charleston for a few days," I told her. You can cook and clean for your guests yourself. I'm not anybody's cook, and I sure as hell am not anybody's servant. The color drained straight out of her face. Her mouth opened and nothing came out. Charleston, she finally managed, voice shaking. What about the groceries? What about his parents needing the master suite? You agreed to the shed. I nodded, kept my smile steady. The master suite is entirely yours to sort out, I said. As for the groceries, that list is still folded in my coat pocket. You'd better get moving if you want those turkeys. Trevor scrambled down the ladder, panic all over his face. Dad, wait, you can't just leave, he said, hands out like he could physically stop me. We've got 22 people coming. We can't handle this alone. You need to stay. You don't need me, Trevor, I told him, flat and cold. You need a caterer and a maid. I'm neither one. I'm a man going on a well-earned vacation. Headlights swept across the front windows just then, my ride to the airport, right on time. I didn't offer another word. I pulled the door open, let the cold November air rush into the warm foyer, and stepped out without looking back. The heavy door shut behind me with a solid sound, leaving them both frozen in that foyer surrounded by half-strung Christmas lights and the first real taste of a reality they hadn't seen coming. I slid into the car, told the driver the airport, and watched that house shrink in the rearview mirror, feeling nothing but pure, quiet freedom. On the drive, I opened my banking app and waited. I knew exactly what was unfolding 2 states north. Megan had no choice but to make that grocery run herself. Cart piled high with everything on that ridiculous list, completely secure in the false belief my card was footing the bill. Somewhere over Tennessee, my phone buzzed a decline alert, $3,100 at a specialty grocer. I let out a genuine laugh in the back of that car. A minute later, a second attempt, same amount, same result, declined. I could picture the line behind her, the whispers, the cashier's patient, unbothered face as she informed Megan the card wasn't going through. She'd have had no choice but to pull out her own card, the one with the 26% interest in a balance she never let Trevor see. By the time I landed and checked into my hotel, my phone was buzzing nonstop with calls from Trevor. I let every single one roll to voicemail. When I finally listened, his voice was frantic, breathless. Dad, there's some massive bank error, he said. Megan had to put $5,000 on her own card. It's maxed out. You need to call and fix this right now. In the background, I could hear Megan screaming at him, blaming him, absolutely unraveling over a cart of cheese and salmon. I deleted the message. I didn't call the bank. I turned my phone face down on the hotel nightstand and slept better than I had in 2 years. 48 hours later, I was sitting on a wraparound porch at a bed and breakfast in Charleston with a cup of coffee, watching the harbor when my security app pinged. 22 people were pulling into my driveway in a fleet of rental cars, hauling suitcases through the cold, complaining loudly about the weather. I watched in silence from 1,000 miles away, sipping coffee while my former house filled up with strangers standing on borrowed time. 2 days later, right on schedule, the utilities went dark. Not because anyone flipped a switch by hand. The transfer processed automatically the second the clock hit the agreed hour. The furnace in the basement fell silent. The digital thermostats went black. The pilot lights on both water heaters snuffed out. The refrigerator, stocked with everything Megan had bled her savings for, stopped humming. I sat on that porch imagining the whole thing unfold exactly the way it did. Trevor's father waking up expecting a hot shower and finding ice water instead. The kids waking up shivering under thin blankets. Somebody wandering the hallway, flipping light switches that did nothing. Trevor being sent down to the breaker box with his phone flashlight, finding every switch perfectly aligned, understanding slowly, in the dark and cold, that this wasn't a blown fuse. I let the phone ring 3 times that evening before I answered. Megan's voice hit me before I even got the phone to my ear, high and frantic. It's freezing, Dad. The power's out, the water's ice cold. His mother sitting in 3 coats in the living room. His uncle's threatening to fly home tonight. You need to call the utility company and fix this right now. You're ruining everything. You're humiliating me. I let her finish. Then I told her, calm and even, that there was no error. There was no billing mistake. And there was absolutely nothing I could do because I no longer owned that house. The line went dead silent except for the wind howling through her end of the call. You sold it, she finally whispered. But we live here. My whole family's here. That, I told her, is a problem you're going to have to solve without me. I hung up, opened my settings, and blocked both their numbers before the shock had even worn off her voice. The following morning, from that same porch, I watched the security feed load on my phone my old driveway buried under frost, packed with rental cars, windows fogged over from the inside where the cold had won. Right at 9, a black sedan pulled up behind a utility truck, and a man in a heavy overcoat carrying a metal clipboard climbed out, flanked by two guys who looked like they moonlighted as bouncers and a locksmith trailing behind with a tool belt over his shoulder. They didn't look like holiday guests. They looked like an eviction crew, because that's exactly what they were. The man knocked 4 times, hard, and waited. When the door finally opened, Megan stood there wrapped in a blanket, hair a mess, lips faintly blue from a night without heat, looking absolutely nothing like the woman who'd handed me a $4,000 grocery list 2 weeks earlier. The property manager informed her, flat and unbothered, that this was now the site of a hospital expansion project, that the previous owner had surrendered all rights weeks ago, and that everyone currently inside the structure was trespassing on a condemned commercial property scheduled for demolition. Trevor's father shoved past his daughter-in-law, red-faced, demanding to know what nonsense this was, insisting his son had bought this house. The manager didn't blink. He pulled a stack of legal papers from his folder and pushed them straight into Trevor's chest. 24 hours, he said. Vacate or the police handle the rest. Behind Megan and Trevor, the rest of the family had gathered in the hallway, wrapped in coats and blankets, listening to every word. An aunt near the back gasped that they'd flown across the country to freeze in a stolen house. Trevor's father turned on his own son, demanding answers, his voice cracking with something between fury and disbelief. Trevor just stood there holding those papers, staring at my signature, and finally admitted out loud, in front of all 22 of them, that none of it was his. That his father-in-law had sold the house right out from under them without a single word of warning. The reaction was instant and merciless. Within the hour, that entire family was packing suitcases, throwing clothes into bags without folding a thing, desperate to get out before the situation got any worse. Trevor's father was on the phone booking a fleet of SUVs to a hotel downtown, paying for every seat himself, furious the whole time. Megan chased her mother-in-law to the door, begging, pleading for a hotel room, for anything. The woman turned, looked at her with pure disgust, told her she'd humiliated the entire family by dragging them into a condemned building to feed her own vanity, and told her not to contact them for the rest of the holiday season. Then she walked out and didn't look back once. By nightfall, the house sat empty, except for Megan and Trevor, standing in a cold, dark foyer with maxed-out credit cards, an empty bank account, and 23 hours left before the police came to remove them by force. A week later, sitting on that same Charleston porch with the harbor gone gold in the evening light, I unblocked Trevor's number. Not because I'd softened. A man in my line of work checks that the shutdown held. The phone rang within the hour. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. I could hear a motel television in the background, a siren somewhere outside his window. Trevor's voice came through broken, stripped of every ounce of the entitlement he used to wear so easily. He begged, said they were down to their last few dollars in a roadside motel, that his truck was about to get repossessed, that he'd pay me back every cent if I just wired them enough for an apartment. I let him talk until he ran completely out of breath. Then I told him, calm and level, that my role as his personal bank had ended the exact moment he let his wife exile me to a tool shed in my own house. I reminded him of the night he sat at my table and said nothing while she banished me from the room where I held my wife's hand as she died. I told him an adult man carries the full weight of his own choices, and that this was the last conversation we'd ever have on the subject. He was still crying when I ended the call. I blocked his number for good, and I meant it that time. A month after that, I'm sitting on a balcony overlooking the water in Charleston, in a house I bought outright with a fraction of what that sale brought in. No frost on the windows. No sticky rings on my table. No stranger's suitcase in my hallway. I moved a framed photo of Carol onto the table beside my coffee, the one from our 20th anniversary, her laughing at something just out of frame, hair caught in the wind. Some people might say selling that farmhouse was betraying everything Carol and I built together. I know the opposite is true. We didn't spend 26 years working ourselves into the ground, so 2 people who never once said thank you could treat our life's work like a bottomless account. I protected what she and I actually stood for. I protected her memory by refusing to let it be looted, one grievance at a time. The lesson in all of it is simple enough, and if you've made it this far, You already know it in your bones. Loving your family doesn't mean funding their disrespect forever. Real family runs on gratitude and mutual respect, not entitlement dressed up as tradition. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a grown child and for yourself is step back and let them finally meet the world without you standing between them and the consequences they built with their own two hands. If this story hit home for you, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and subscribe for more. Because trust me, this isn't the last time somebody mistook my patience for weakness.